It works. So, today, y'all are here for conspiracy theories as alternate history, also known as fake news, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah.
All right. This was inspired by an alternate history panel we were doing in DragonCon. You can boo or yay that, up to you. And I realized that you can make a great anthology based on the idea of what if we looked at alternate history, conspiracy theories as alternate histories, because they really are. Okay, if you think about it, they really, really are. Look at the work of Oliver Stone, except for Any Given Sunday, which is an actual good movie, and you can see all sorts of conspiracy theories which have no relation to reality being presented on the screen, right? And the aftermath of those things are all possibilities or divergent timelines or entries into the multiverse. How many of you watched Loki? How many of you didn't? You rectify that immediately. I don't care if you have to pirate it. That is a damn good show. Anyways, it's like Doctor Who except with a script. Anyways, so the thing is here is most of conspiracy theories, there are very real conspiracies, okay? Let me make that very clear. The CIA, for example, sold drugs to fund its operations in Vietnam, right? Yes. This is well documented. However, the CIA did not sell drugs to the inner city in the guise of crack. That's also well documented. And you can tell the difference because if they had, that would have meant it worked. And that would have meant that it wasn't the CIA. So, more to the point, there's all sorts of... And this is the case with most conspiracy theories. They add layers of complexity where layers of complexity need not exist. What happened at the inner cities with crack was that Pablo Escobar was taken out of the equation, okay, which meant that there was plenty of room for other cartels to move in, and Escobar controlled the cocaine traffic, but all of a sudden he wasn't, so people could move into crack cocaine, which Escobar did not sell because, high volume, low margin versus high margin, or medium volume, high margin sales, okay? Crack cocaine earns less than straight up cocaine for the distributor if they have a monopoly, which Escobar did. So you get a bunch of people who have an open market all of a sudden that they didn't have before, and so they flood it with crack cocaine. Very simple. The guy who insisted that the CIA was manipulating the crack market had to recant. The stories were pulled. There was, multiple points of evidence that he shared were found to be fabricated. Investigations by Colombia showed that it was, in fact, new cartels coming up who had new business, so on and so forth. So, adding a layer of complexity is a good sign of a conspiracy theory because people tend to do what their self-interest is, they tend to do stupid things, and they tend to be slow about it, right? So, blowing up the World Trade Center, that required 10,000 people planting bombs for a couple weeks at least in order to blow up the World Trade Center. Or you could just fly 2 planes into it. So, which is this easier solution? 10,000 people being quiet about this thing and they haven't come forward at all since, or a bunch of people engaged in another conspiracy who trying to blow up the same building they had tried to blow up in 1993. Okay? This is what I mean. The conspiracy is another layer of complexity added on to it that you don't need. Because you already had a conspiracy. And they did it. So, can you all hear me? Everybody in the back?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I realize I'm not using a microphone because I rarely do. So, this gentleman has accidentally volunteered to error check me and to You didn't have to come up. Okay. Let's thank you very much. And if you have anything to add, just add it, okay? Anybody else, if you want to ask questions, I'm open to them. Go ahead, ask questions. If you want to tell me I'm wrong, please, as long as you have cites. So, go ahead.
Let's take the big one, 9/11.
Yeah.
What do you think the behind the purpose of it was?
For 9/11?
Yeah, as far as the American public goes.
For 9/11, the purpose behind 9/11 was to attack the Americans.
Okay.
I mean, that's the stated purpose of the people who did it.
That's not the conspiracy theory.
No, it is not. So let's make an alternate history where that's the case. All right, let's pretend that the impossible happened and somehow 10,000 federal employees kept quiet. Okay? If any of you have known a federal employee, you know this is impossible. So, let's say 10,000 federal employees did it quietly, efficiently, and under a budget where no one noticed. Okay? Again, I've been a federal employee. I know that there are probably some in the audience here. Tell me how likely that is. Okay, so we're agreed. So we're agreed that this is not plausible, but let's say it is plausible. What would the aftermath look like?
Paperwork.
Well, no, I'm not talking in real life.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Fear.
Fear would work very well. So we have fear. So what would happen afterwards? Go ahead and don't say what happened, because actually that probably wouldn't happen if this worked, because you wouldn't have a bunch of people who are really surprised but kind of expecting it, which is what was happening in real life. Oh, by the way, the same people have blown up a boat, not a boat, tried to blow up a destroyer in the end of the Clinton.
The USS Cole.
Yes, the USS Cole. So, again, obviously, when you got multiple people trying to blow up U.S. stuff and they blow up something else, probably it's them. But let's pretend it wasn't them and they were just a patsy. Like Lee Harvey Oswald totally wasn't in real life. So, yes, you were going to say something.
I'm saying the direct aftermath before it's known that who the ones who did it, there would be an enormous amount of whistleblowers. We see how many just in the past administration and still going on now, how many whistleblowers come forward, some substantiated, some not. I don't think, kind of along the line of what you were saying, that a secret that big, the biggest secret that ever happened in our history, would be able to be kept quiet for 5 hours afterwards.
That's a good point. So what would these people who set all this up, and by the way, they targeted the Pentagon too, which had a large casualty rate and was, heavily damaged. So they must not like somebody in the Defense Department, at least in whatever, well, I don't know which department was housed in that part of the Defense Department, but, so what do you think, we're building the alternate history here. What do you think would happen to all those potential whistleblowers by prepared, remember they managed to pull this off, so they're prepared, government?
I think they would all get Epstein.
That's a good point. That's a good point. There are also conspiracy theories about that, which are fun.
I don't think we would know until 70 years after everyone's at least dead, and maybe there's like 1 or 2 people who know about it.
Yeah. Yeah, what would you say?
This discussion involved Dr. David Grimes' work at all from Oxford.
Who?
There's an Oxford professor who developed an equation of sorts that pretty accurately predicts how long it would take for a conspiracy to fail. It's based on 3 variables. One is the number of people involved in the conspiracy. The second is the amount of time it takes for it to be exposed. The third is the intrinsic improbability of the conspiracy itself, and he kind of derived this based on a handful of actual conspiracies that ended up being revealed
Okay.
The first one was.
Let me quickly summarize for the people. Did everybody hear that, or do you need help? Okay. There's a guy at Oxford, Dr. David Grimes,
Yeah.
who developed an algorithm to determine likelihood of conspiracy and its exposure based on the number of people involved,
The amount of time.
the amount of times passed, and
The intrinsic probability.
the
or
intrinsic probability of the event occurring. So, which is an interesting thing, and yes, I've heard his work, and it's pretty good. I mean, this is social science, so there's no real way to determine if that's accurate, but it's a useful metric at least.
But yeah, there's two big ones that fit into what he came up with.
Yes?
Oh, I walked in late, so I didn't really hear like everything. But my question is, you said 9/11 was not an inside job?
No, we're assuming that unlike reality, where 9/11 was absolutely not an inside job, because we know that Al Qaeda tried to do this before, and they had just blown up the USS Cole, and they've been, they took credit for it, and there was a lot of other work that they were doing, and there was intelligence in multiple departments that wasn't being shared that said all of this was coming. Okay, so we have huge amounts of information that, looking back, we should have known. And when people said Al Qaeda did this, everyone was like, yeah, of course. Why didn't I know this coming forward? So we know that Al Qaeda did because we had ridiculous amounts of information. My wife is back there, right? And she said, what did I say when this happened? Yeah, immediately. And I'm a civilian, okay? I just pay attention to the news, okay? So it was pretty much, and we found plans. The ridiculous preponderance of evidence is very clear. There was Al Qaeda. Now, what we're doing is postulating that it was a somehow incredibly competent group of government employees that somehow managed to be quiet, somehow managed to do all this work on time and under a budget where they wouldn't be noticed. Okay? So that's the basic premise. So we're looking at what would happen after that. We're building an alternate history. Is that clear? Okay. Oh, do you have any more?
Oh, yeah. So when the planes hit the Twin Towers, why did they come from the bottom?
What?
If the plane hit the towers, like
It didn't. There was all sorts of. First off, it wasn't a controlled explosion. We could tell because of all the debris. When you bring down a building in a controlled demolition, it's usually within the footprint of the building, ideally, or close to. That wasn't the case with the World Trade Centers at all. Okay? So, also, everything behaved in the way it had when, say, it was shortly after World War II, a bomber hit, which building in New York? Yeah, a bomber hit the Empire State Building in New York, and it behaved similarly. Of course, a bomber is smaller than, 737s? Is that right? Which are fully loaded with fuel, ready to go on long trips. So a bomber is much smaller, much weaker, and it caused similar but much lower magnitude devastation from that. So what happened was exactly what modeling showed would have happened, and what we have experience showed would have happened if that was occurring. But asking questions like that is a good way to look at the truth. Okay, I'm not trying to discourage that, and that's the questions that whenever you approach a conspiracy theory, you have to ask those questions. Is there something like this that has happened before, that we know has happened before? If not, is there something derivable? And what does modeling show? And so on. And you may find that there's something iffy. There are real conspiracies. For some reason, someone who was the Kennedys went after were the first really to go after the mafia, despite the fact that J. Edgar Hoover kept on insisting the mafia wasn't a problem. Of course, the Kennedys knew it was a problem because their dad was in an Irish mafioso, and that's how And they had controlled the Chicago election to make sure that they won Illinois using mafia ties. So, and they had promised all sorts of things to the mafia, like they wouldn't go after them. So they knew that the mafia existed. So they did, but Hoover said this wasn't occurring. But the Kennedys, people who were working with the Kennedys, who may not have known quite so intimately what the mafia was like, asked those questions that you asked and found the conspiracies that were in the mafia. Okay? So, anyways, do you want to go on longer on this? Besides the, mass execution of all possible witnesses and, police state that would occur immediately?
What about the people who claim they heard bombs go off at the top of the tower?
Any number of things could sound like bombs going off, especially in the cataclysmic collapse, because a lot of pressure is being released. An explosion is just a lot of gas moving rapidly. Okay, that's what an explosion is. Okay, so I'm sure you can come up with any number of ways that something could move fast enough to cause what sounded like an explosion. I mean, okay. One last before we go on to this, because it looks like everybody wants to.
I really don't mean to discredit you or anything like that, but what do you personally feel happened on 9/11 that day?
Terrorists flew into the towers.
Okay,
I mean,
Okay.
to quote South Park, a bunch of pissed off Muslims, attacked the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and tried to attack the Capitol. That's what happened. I mean, there's no evidence otherwise. Let's go to another conspiracy. Any favorite conspiracy you guys want to address? Okay. You had a chance to talk. You can just talk. You can talk over me. I don't care.
I mean, there's the classic.
Pizzagate! Jesus.
Let him talk.
I'm letting you talk.
My favorite conspiracy theory: Hitler lived and got to Argentina.
Okay. Hitler lived and went to Argentina.
Many facts.
First off, the question we have to look at when we're discussing alternate histories: Would that have made a difference?
Yes,
Really? Would it have?
because in the grand scheme of things, no. But in the short 30 years or so, yes. Nobody would have been brought to justice. That final blow would not have been brought to justice, and there were proof that there were Nazi movements in Argentina.
Oh, of course there were.
So it makes sense that there were theories that they were going to try to do something else down there.
Yeah, there were Nazi movements all over the world. They got very quiet once World War II started. For example, as I mentioned, the Kennedys. Guess who supported the Nazis right until the U.S. started getting involved in World War II?
Charles Lindbergh.
Him too. Coco Chanel. The former King of England and his bride, what was her name? Wallace.
Buckley for the third.
No,
Wallace Simpson.
Wallace Simpson. Yeah, they were Nazi spies and activists trying to spread the Nazi regime all over the Caribbean and wondering why they were exiled to the Caribbean. So
There was a huge Nazi party in New England that was actually trying to get Hitler to visit the United States in the 30s.
yes, and we all know someone whose father was a member of the Nazi Party.
Donald Trump.
Yep, that's true. Who used the slogan,
Make America Great Again.
yep, and America First, as part of their propaganda. And he was we know this because he was arrested being a Nazi in New York. So, yeah, go ahead.
I think part of it that it would be a blow morally to the Allies and the people who suffered that they never caught Hitler, and I think it would make a lot of people question people in power. But I think also it would make World War II purposeless.
I have to disagree with you about one thing, which is that the Allies didn't capture Hitler, the Soviets did.
Right. But
Who
what I'm
were
saying is
allies, but not actually members of the Allies.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to say is that without definitive ending of it, like we have him, it's a giant question mark of the entire European campaign.
Okay, that's a good point. So, yeah.
Just a question to you. Do you think that anybody who was searching after Hitler at this time would have let, you said the Russians who were protecting him?
No, they weren't.
No, but the Russians got into Berlin first.
Whoever you think was protecting Hitler at the time, I'm not saying that you were protecting Hitler. Right.
Although politically, recently, there are people.
I said that you weren't. I'm sorry. I'm not equating you to that. I apologize. But anybody who was harboring Hitler at the time, wouldn't they be bloodthirsty?
What do you elaborate?
Well, wouldn't they? I mean, they would want to kill the motherfucker.
I mean, there was a plenty of people
He's
in his party.
a dude. Out of all of history, wouldn't you want to kill this motherfucker?
Yeah, but he already had one of his top doctors get to Argentina.
Right.
So that was already a thing that was happening. So if he was going to go anywhere, that's where you were going to go.
We're
to be safe.
postulating that Hitler had more foresight than he actually did, and maybe left a little early.
Or he used one of his many body doubles.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Because the United States didn't get to see the body until the 70s.
Yeah.
And there were still questions of whether or not the dental records matched Hitler's.
So, but that's a good question. And so you postulate that there would be the World War II would be kind of like,
Question mark. Like, why did it even happen if we didn't stop the guy and end him?
well,
At least bring him to justice.
although of course there's a lot of good reasons to do this, but
Right.
Anyways, but that's a good question. With more doubt in the 1950s or 40s, would World War II Part 2, the Korean War, have occurred? The expansion pack have occurred? I mean, that's a good question.
I was going to say that there were some declassified FBI files of...
Well, I hope so.
Yeah. There's declassified FBI files where people were making claims that they saw him in Argentina, and they didn't really go anywhere. The investigations kind of filtered out. They didn't really have definitive either way.
Yeah. Well, of course, he could have survived and be experimented on by the Soviets, because they were all into that, too.
Mm-hmm. It seems like everybody was into experimenting back then.
Oh, the Soviets were the worst of the... Well, no, the Japanese Imperial Army was the worst, followed by the Soviets, followed by the Nazis. Yes, I put in the Nazis third. And there's a reason, and I'm not going to go into it because some of you want to not lose your lunch.
I was going to say that going with his idea, I mean, it would also be possible to cause unrest in Argentina and start that whole mess.
Well, it was.
Yeah.
Have you heard about the Village of the Twins? That's because their experiments went from Germany to Argentina.
And of course, remember
what I'm saying is letting everything cook down there. An example, I'm just going to use a game for an example. You see it in Hearts of Iron, where instead, if you put them there and they cook something that way, that's what I mean.
Yeah, but there was a real life...
Causing further unrest and military.
There was a real life fascist regime in Argentina, Juan and Evita Perón. Right? That's a real life fascist regime, which occurred fairly quickly after World War II.
Oh, I
Yeah. So, let's move on from this, but that's a good speculation. Who else has one that we want to go into? Let's hear from a lady.
My personal favorite is Paul is Dead.
Paul is Dead. That's a good one. That's actually featured in here.
Oh, yay!
So, it's not my story. So I forget what it says. But let's do it.
Which Paul are we talking about?
Which Paul are we talking?
Paul Rudd, Paul McCartney.
Paul McCartney dying. When was Paul supposed to have died? Why don't you stand up and give us the summary?
All right. So there's been a conspiracy theory since the Beatles were still together that Paul McCartney died and they replaced him with a little.
Yes.
Just basically like a dossier. And part of the evidence is through like all of the backwards messages in the Beatles songs. Well, Walrus was Paul. Walrus is a symbol of death, and so stuff like that. There's a bunch
Yeah.
of, there's like a whole analysis, like this in-deep like analysis of the Abbey Road album cover, and like has all those messages about Paul being dead, and also the fact that the way he looks now isn't how he looked when he was younger, which is how aging works, but also people just have like this whole theory that it's just now that this person's age doesn't look how Paul McCartney would look when he was old.
Yeah, so that's a brief summary. Thank you for that. I'm not as much of a Beatles maven, although they are vastly superior to the Rolling Stones, and Paul is vastly superior to John. Just look at the works they wrote afterwards when they're broken up. One of John's best songs, Instant Karma? Guess who wrote that? Paul McCartney wrote it. That's right. Anyways, he also wrote one of the best Bond songs, Live and Let Die. So, anyways, what would change if Paul was in fact dead and they were wheeling him out Weekend at Bernie style? Animatronic Paul.
It could explain.
They stopped touring around about that time.
Yeah, and it could explain why they broke up and then never really got back together.
I know why they didn't get back together. John was abusive. Well, anyways.
If he was dead, I mean, if he was the key member that really kept them glued together.
That's true, because he and John were having an affair. That's true. John and Paul were having an affair.
That's hot.
Kinda? I mean, they're both kind of pasty British.
Yeah.
Like,
That's hot.
they're BBC 8s.
But it could also explain the trend of different artists who disappear or die, and people still think they see them afterwards, like Tupac and Elvis and Michael Jackson, that died, and kind of their legacy is
L. Ron
already
Hubbard.
dead. Yeah.
So, anyways, do you think anything would change in music? So this is the point where we have to ask, when we do conspiracy theories as alternate history, at least from a writer's perspective or a historian's perspective, what would change? And in this case, well, you wouldn't have Wings, so you wouldn't have the amazing...
Unacceptable.
You wouldn't have Wings, you wouldn't have some really good music, but on the other hand, you wouldn't have Do They Know It's Christmas, which is one of the most patronizing songs of all time. Is Live and Let Die worth more than Do They Know It's Christmas? I'm going with slightly yes. So, because even covers of Live and Let Die are amazing, like Guns N' Roses. But, anyways, do we have to discuss that enough for you?
I mean, sure, yeah.
Okay, another one. Anybody?
The moon.
Jesus is black.
What?
Katy Perry is John Benet Ramsey.
That's a neat one. Time doesn't work out at all, but somehow Katy Perry is much younger than she actually is, and is Jean Benet Ramsey. She's very precocious, and she develops extremely early. So, let's say, what does that change? Wait, how did Perry's... Or her real last name is Hudson. Her real name is Katie Hudson. Obviously, she could take Katie Hudson because Kate Hudson, the daughter of Goldie Hawn, has Kate Hudson. So, how did the Hudson family acquire John Benet Ramsey?
Because she was secretly moved to California.
Okay. Sure. Go ahead.
The brother killed her.
What?
The brother killed her.
I don't know enough about
No, really. Look at the evidence. The brother killed her.
Okay,
And they
but
tried to cover
we're
it.
assuming that John Benet wasn't killed.
Oh, well, I
And
don't
she
know what to tell you.
became Katy Perry.
It doesn't matter either way.
All right, someone want to go with Pizzagate?
No.
No?
The moon.
No! We'll go with
The moon.
Ooh,
New World Order?
Pizzagate.
For life.
I'm going to hold that off because New World Order is one of my faves because it actually happened. It is happening. It's not alternate history. Novus Ordo Secularum as you will see on your bill, is we are living in the New World Order. This is exactly what it was supposed to be. Well, not exactly, because there are people who aren't like British talking, but and male talking, but and not landowners talking. But this was what it was supposed to be, except that we were all supposed to be British or male landowners. But this is what it was supposed to happen. So it did.
Yeah.
Oh, no. That's not what the Novus Ordo Secularum actually means. That's what the conspiracy, that's a good point. There's a difference between what something is implied to be and what the new order of the world is supposed to be is a relatively, but not entirely, secular state where the people who, in this case, were British and landed, but ultimately many more people, had say in their government. That was the entire point. And that there was no king, no nobility, things like this. That was what we got. So it worked. Because you have to remember that's what the Enlightenment thinkers wanted. That's, of course, also no Catholics. And I don't even have to go into what would happen to the Jews. Although no, they were friendly to Jews and Muslims, just no Catholics. So if anybody tells you the founding fathers didn't like Muslims, that's actually not true. They wrote many essays and letters about how much they liked Muslims. So, bring that up at Thanksgiving. So, but anyways, so that let's talk about. So, what if there was a one world government? What would it look like? What would it change? When would it occur?
Except the rich.
Yes. Population control. Would we need it because people are not having children naturally? So it surprised everybody, by the way. But maybe this is all conspiracy. The video games, the women learning things in school, having reproductive ability, having contraceptives, that's all conspiracy.
Have you ever heard of Bill Gates talking on a TED Talk about population control?
No. That man is an idiot.
Yeah. You have to watch it.
He's an idiot and a thief. I have a strong feelings that every bit of good that came out of the Gates Foundation was because of Melinda.
For sure.
So, because not only is he an idiot, but we found out recently that he's a sleazy idiot. So, but yeah, population control is an interesting thing, and that could have actually happened. Because a lot of the people who don't like the concept of the one world government tend to be the sort of people who also think that women shouldn't have rights, or at least not full rights. Am I wrong on that?
Yeah.
I'm wrong on that?
No, you're not wrong.
Okay, so this idea of population control where there's an extremely high correlation of economic and educational freedom given to women and causal relationship too, I just want to make sure that, and low population, low birth rates. So the more education, even without contraception, the more education and the more economic opportunities available, the fewer children are born. Also, there's a much higher likelihood that those children will succeed and survive and go on to be successful in their own right. Those are also causally related. So it's a self-perpetuating attempt to keep women working. So, yes?
Okay, this is not all conspiracy theories, right?
Yeah.
Okay, my husband tells me not to talk about them in front of people because I believe in them. And it's like, don't talk. Okay, so the COVID vaccine and the
which COVID vaccine?
Like thing along those lines. Have you heard of that?
I've heard a lot of different COVID vaccine ones.
About how
you're gonna have to narrow.
Like infertile or messes with their messes with their menstrual cycle or things like that. Like
They actually had to do a study to disprove that. You know what the study found?
what?
Everyone who took the COVID vaccine got pregnant. Everyone who didn't.
Okay.
Which probably has some other affecting element, but it
There's
just shows.
probably other factors to that.
Yeah, but what it shows you is that the vaccine doesn't prevent pregnancy. Yeah.
The moon landing.
Okay.
What you said?
Which one?
About the vaccine.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I don't know if anyone heard about.
I'm gonna say the COVID vaccine overrules the moon landing because it's something which we have to deal with right now, and a lot of people are being hit by people who are not paying attention. Go ahead.
I don't know if anyone heard about Infowars or Alex Jones before.
Oh my God. Oh my God. He's winning culture for the right. Or vice versa.
I've been listening since I was a kid. Like, that's what got me started with politics and everything. But they say that people, there's been studies that people who have the vaccine, the people that are surrounding the people that had the vaccines are becoming infertile. So
The
when
spike protein.
yeah. So there's a huge study about that people around them are becoming infertile. Not
I
people,
would.
but just around them.
That's not how that works.
Yep. No.
Okay, I don't know if that's maybe. I do know how that works. You know what? Guess what causes infertility? COVID causes infertility. If you don't get vaccinated and you get COVID, so if you're vaccinated and the people around you aren't vaccinated and they start passing COVID around, of course there's going to be greater infertility because COVID causes infertility. And by the way, for men, a little hiccup downstairs. I mean, not a little, not literally a hiccup because that would be hilarious. But yeah, that actually makes sense.
Not that way, but look it up. Do some research. Don't knock until you try it.
Oh no, I do research.
Oh no, I bet you're a smart guy.
I wouldn't say that. I just read a lot and remember stuff.
Is the conspiracy theory that the vaccine is used to control population?
Could be. Wouldn't that be neat?
But then it doesn't explain why there's like 5 different vaccines, and now there's Pfizer. Was Pfizer or Moderna is kind of come out with another one? So
yeah.
I think it's more about causing chaos, like miscommunication, and so then you have more go back to the New World Order thing of like chess pieces mentally.
Right. So that's true, except there actually is a conspiracy tied to the COVID vaccines. The Russian Sputnik vaccine, which the Chinese vaccine is based off of, doesn't work. But they hid the studies where it didn't work. And it was distributed to India because who cares, from the Russian perspective, what happens to a bunch of Indians, right? So, I mean, it's about 60% effective, which is not good for vaccine, right? Okay, so it technically works, but it's, it's not the 95 plus that the Pfizer and Moderna does. And the AstraZeneca one, which the Europeans pushed because, of course, it was developed there, but so was the Pfizer. I don't know why they're not pushing that. Also doesn't work as well. So, but yeah, there literally is a cover-up tied to the Sputnik vaccine. But Russia has never been concerned about what happens to the peasants. So. And peasants being defined as anybody who's not a member of the current political elite. Back there was a question.
Wouldn't that be like them trying to control population in India as well?
I would say, this is an interesting point because if I was a conspiracy theorist, I would say yes. But since I know that Russia loves to toot its own horn, feels really inadequate against Westerners, like throughout its history, like going back to the founding of the Kievan Rus, way back when, and Putin likes money, I would say that it's much more likely that they just don't care about what happens, and this was more about getting one over the Westerners because they came out with the vaccine first, which they did. But from a perspective of a conspiracy theory, dealing with Putin, you actually kind of have to think that way. It could be he's trying to depopulate India so they can invade. because I really wouldn't put it past Putin, even though they have to go through Afghanistan, and Russia has a very, very bad history with it in Afghanistan. As anybody who was alive in the 80s remembers. So, or anybody who's ever dealt with the Taliban, knows, because we funded them, so they would kick out the Russians, and then we had. Yeah. So, let's get to the moon. If everybody's ready. Moon landing fake. All right. So, real world, there's no way you could fake that because the technology simply didn't exist. In fact, there's no speculation that you could fake that until the late 70s, because the technology didn't even exist in the late 70s, but you could kind of see with the most basic computer animation and so on, where you could spin a cube, that you could kind of see what they were talking about, but literally the lenses didn't exist to film something that would be at the level of resolution needed to produce what we saw, okay, in an Earth environment, okay? There simply wasn't the technology. You would have had to create something like Disney created for The Mandalorian with the volume, okay? You would have to build that, which you could have in the early to mid 2000s, but definitely couldn't in 1968. So, on the other hand, and this is why this conspiracy theory still has legs, is 2001 is an amazing work of art, right? I mean, it may not be well paced, but it definitely is visually stunning and believable, especially at the time. It still kind of holds up today as long as you fast forward. So, so you can kind of see where the idea that Kubrick got the idea, or was brought in, and then used that tech to build 2001: The Space Odyssey. Okay, and somehow you got Sri Lankan pedophile in exile Arthur C. Clarke to pitch in. So, anyways, what would have happened if we had faked the moon landing, and why we would have faked it?
We would be waiting in line
To beat Russia.
To beat Russia.
To beat Russia. Very good. That's an easy answer. So how big would the conspiracy have had to have been to fake out Russia, who was trying to do the same thing and looking at the moon while the landing was occurring, and after they put up the reflectors, more importantly, for a laser sounding to be done? How big would the conspiracy have been to do that?
Everyone in this.
Yeah, it was actually calculated that it was cheaper to go to the moon than to fake the moon landing. I'm not kidding on that. It is literally true that you would have had to have more people and more tech involved, because you would have to build the sets and all the rest, as well as land reflectors and so on the moon anyway. Something had to land on the moon. But let's pretend, so we have this massive group of people, because let's say we don't have manned space flight sufficient to go to the moon, but we can put robots on the moon, or at least drop reflectors on the moon. So we fake the moon landing, but we have a huge number of people involved. What happens next?
Oh, I know. We go there 5 more times.
Yeah, especially since people like Kennedy were literally sleeping with Russian spies. I'm going to rip on Kennedy all the time. So,
we do know that there were more than a few USSR agents in the U.S. government at the time.
but they were successfully conned by this conspiracy, we're saying.
But assuming none of them said anything, you also have to trust that every single person involved will never say anything, will never report anything, and that no one ever spills the secret, which isn't going to happen.
I understand that, but we're saying that there's a magical guise on them. Okay?
It's not too far-fetched to trick them, because we did it with Star Wars. We got them believing that we were going to build the shield around America in space, and they believed it.
That's a good point. However, the secret to that is we believed it too.
Then you can fool
You
us.
can always bullshit someone if you're telling the truth as you see it. So, and I mean, the technology wasn't ready, but all the projects were feasible. Eventually, just not that. They're actually feasible now. China and Russia both have things like that up there right now. We don't, but because we abide by our treaties. So, but yeah, so there. So let's say you somehow manage to convince everybody that like these are promotion videos or reels or something like this. So that's a good way to do it. You get everybody to believe that this is the truth. So what changes though, besides setting up 6 more missions? Or 5 more missions?
You gotta America has to keep ramping up their spending in space.
Yes, which we know did not happen thanks to LBJ. So and his budget cuts right before Nixon came in.
I think the idea would be if we can fool them once, we have to keep fooling them to keep them out of catching up to us.
Right.
The whole idea was a space race, so we didn't have to end there. We would have to keep making it up.
Right.
So we would have to, instead of putting money in Vietnam, we would put more money into space.
Yes, although
Or at least
bear in
space.
mind that unlike what Oliver Stone says, because I'm going to bring this back. Let me. Does anybody have the time? Okay, so I only have a few more minutes. Unlike what Oliver Stone said, JFK was gung-ho on going to Vietnam, and in fact, escalating Vietnam was literally his idea. Okay, so he planned a lot of this. LBJ executed a lot of this. LBJ mishandled a lot, like with the Gulf of Tonkin incident and the giant series of battles in Vietnam that all happened at once. Tet Offensive. The one that we won, but we lost the propaganda war on. So, LBJ mishandled it, but it was all Kennedy's idea initially to go further in. Actually, technically, it's all the French's idea, so you can blame them. So, all wars that happened in the 20th century are the fault of the French. Prove or disprove. Anyways, last bit, I want you to remember that stupidity and confidence and trying to get things done easily always trump conspiracies. Occam's razor works really well with conspiracies. But conspiracy theories are absolutely a blast. And come up, look at the books. I hope you had fun. I'm on Facebook primarily. So are you now. All right. Thank you for coming out.
Thank you.